The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across mahogany walls. St. Margaret's Private Academy Faculty Lounge, where $50,000 tuition discussions happened over imported coffee. Tonight, charity gala wine loosened tongues. Laughter rippled, sharp, cruel. Principal Davidson's manicured finger pointed like a weapon at the man in corner shadows, faded blue coveralls, worn work boots, window squeegee dripping in calloused hands. Why don't we ask our janitor here to teach karate to the kids? The words sliced through air thick with privilege. I'm sure he could show them how to. Sweep floors with their feet. More laughter. Teachers who earned his yearly salary in a single month. But Marcus Williams didn't flinch, didn't shrink. Instead, something ancient stirred behind his quiet eyes. The squeegee hit the floor with a wet slap. Rubber gloves peeled away like shed skin. His shoulders straightened with military precision, hands clasped at chest level. Then came the bow deep, respectful, impossibly graceful. Pure Japanese ceremony in a world of American arrogance. The laughter died. Silence swallowed the room whole. I will teach them, Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of buried secrets. But not karate. Marcus Williams had been invisible for 2 years. 42 years old, silver threading through dark hair, shoulders that had once carried more than cleaning supplies. Every morning at 6:30, he arrived at St. Margaret's Private Academy in his 10-year-old Toyota Camry, parking in the far corner where luxury SUVs wouldn't be offended by his presence. His uniform was always pressed, his movements deliberate, his voice rarely heard above a whisper. The children of Fortune 500 CEOs, Supreme Court justices, and tech billionaires passed him like furniture. To them, he was background noise in their carefully orchestrated lives. But Marcus saw everything. He watched 10-year-old Tommy Rodriguez struggle with his shoelaces because no one had taught him the simple loop and pull method. He observed the way 12-year-old Jordan Blake's fists clenched when other kids whispered about his father's pending Senate investigation. He noticed how the smallest details, a dropped pencil, a forgotten lunch money, a tear quickly wiped away, revealed the cracks in these privileged facades. Most adults missed these moments. Marcus collected them like puzzle pieces, understanding that wealth couldn't buy the one thing these children needed most: someone who truly saw them. His own daughter Emma, 9 years old with her mother's gentle smile, attended Roosevelt Elementary across town. Every afternoon, Marcus would drive his beat-up Camry through neighborhoods that grew progressively smaller, houses that shrank like his paycheck. Emma never complained about their tiny 2-bedroom apartment, never asked why they couldn't afford the dance classes her friends took or the latest iPhone everyone seemed to have. She was wise beyond her years, shaped by loss in ways that broke Marcus's heart and made him proud simultaneously. Daddy always says the best things don't cost money, she'd tell her friends, and Marcus would wonder where a 9-year-old learned such wisdom. The memory of Keiko still lived in their routines. Her photograph smiled from the kitchen table, surrounded by Emma's artwork and Marcus's work schedules. She'd been gone 4 years now, taken by a drunk driver on a Tuesday that had started like any other. Before the accident, Marcus had been someone else entirely, someone with dreams, ambitions, a future that stretched beyond mop buckets and window cleaner. But grief had a way of stripping life down to its most essential elements: survival, responsibility, and the quiet dignity of honest work. He'd chosen invisibility as armor, believing that small lives were safer lives. Sarah Martinez had been teaching 4th grade at St. Margaret's for 3 years, long enough to recognize the subtle hierarchies that governed private school politics. At 29, she was one of the younger faculty members, still idealistic enough to believe education could change the world, still naive enough to think privilege and character were related. She'd grown up in a middle-class family, where her father's accounting firm and her mother's nursing career had provided stability, not luxury. Her Boston College education had been paid for through scholarships and student loans, not trust funds and family connections. She'd noticed Marcus Williams from her first week at the academy. While other staff members treated him with polite indifference, Sarah found herself curious about the man who moved through the halls like a ghost. There was something in his posture, straight back despite his humble uniform, observant despite his downcast eyes, that suggested layers beneath the surface. She'd watched him interact with difficult children, seen how his quiet presence could calm a tantrum or redirect destructive energy. He never raised his voice, never showed frustration, yet somehow commanded a respect that many teachers struggled to achieve. The morning after the faculty lounge incident, Sarah found Marcus in the gymnasium, moving through his cleaning routine with unusual intensity. But what she witnessed wasn't cleaning at all. It was choreography. The way he wielded the mop handle resembled sword work, each movement flowing into the next with practiced precision. His footwork was deliberate, balanced, suggesting years of training in something far more sophisticated than janitorial duties. When he paused to catch his breath, Sarah noticed a crescent-shaped scar on his palm, old, faded, but distinct. The kind of mark that came from gripping something sharp for extended periods. "That was quite a response last night," Sarah said, stepping into the gym. Marcus froze, mop handle still in his hands, looking like a man caught in an intimate moment. "I've never seen anyone bow like that. It was beautiful, actually." For a moment, neither spoke. Marcus studied her face, searching for mockery or pity and finding neither. Something in his expression shifted, not opening up, exactly, but cracking slightly, like ice beginning to thaw. "My wife taught me," he said finally. She believed courtesy was the foundation of strength. The way he said wife suggested both deep love and profound loss. Over the following weeks, Sarah began to notice changes in Marcus's interactions with the students. What had started as casual observations became intentional interventions. When Tommy Rodriguez slumped through the hallways, Marcus would demonstrate proper posture through his own example, straightening his shoulders in a way that somehow encouraged the boy to do the same. During lunch periods, he'd show children how to fold their napkins into intricate shapes, cranes, flowers, geometric patterns that required patience and precision. "Every fold must be deliberate," he'd explain. "Rushing creates wrinkles, patience creates beauty." The children responded to Marcus in ways that surprised their teachers. Jordan Blake, notorious for his explosive temper, became calmer in Marcus's presence. Even without direct instruction, kids began mimicking his quiet confidence, his respectful manner of speaking, his habit of cleaning up after himself without being asked. Parents started commenting on changes in their children's behavior, better posture, increased patience, a mysterious new interest in origami. Principal Davidson dismissed these observations as coincidence, but Sarah recognized the subtle influence of a natural teacher. Emma Williams often visited her father after school, waiting in the hallway while he finished his duties. Sarah began timing her own departures to coincide with these moments, fascinated by the relationship between father and daughter. Emma would practice math problems using Marcus's cleaning cart as a desk, or read books while perched on windowsills her father had just cleaned. There was an easy intimacy between them, a shared understanding that spoke of mutual respect and deep affection. "Emma," Marcus would say, "show Miss Martinez how we fold the cleaning cloths." And Emma would demonstrate a technique that turned mundane fabric into perfect squares, her small hands moving with the same precision her father displayed. One afternoon, Sarah discovered Marcus performing what could only be described as a martial arts form in the empty gymnasium. She watched from the doorway as he moved through a series of fluid motions, each gesture controlled and purposeful. His breathing was steady, his focus absolute. This wasn't the stumbling mimicry of someone who'd learned moves from movies. This was years of disciplined training made visible. When he finished, Marcus stood perfectly still for several seconds, eyes closed, as if listening to something only he could hear. When he opened his eyes and saw Sarah watching, neither embarrassment nor anger crossed his features. Instead, he simply nodded, as if he'd been expecting this moment. "You're not just a janitor, are you?" Sarah asked, though it wasn't really a question. Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead with a towel that had been folded into a perfect square. "I'm exactly what I appear to be," he replied. "A man doing honest work, raising his daughter, trying to make tomorrow better than yesterday." But the way he said it suggested that appearances could be both true and incomplete. "My wife used to say that a person's job doesn't define their soul," he added. She was wise about such things. The breakthrough came during a particularly difficult week when Jordan Blake's behavioral problems escalated into physical aggression. The 12-year-old had pushed Tommy Rodriguez down a flight of stairs, resulting in a twisted ankle and a flood of parental phone calls. Principal Davidson was furious, threatening suspension and demanding immediate solutions. The incident had occurred during lunch, when most supervisors were distracted, but Marcus had witnessed everything. His account of the event was precise, detailed, and completely at odds with Jordan's defensive denials. "The boy is afraid," Marcus told Sarah privately. "Fear makes people dangerous when they don't know how to control it." Rather than avoiding Jordan after the incident, Marcus began paying closer attention to him. He'd appear during the boy's most volatile moments, not to lecture or punish, but simply to be present. His calm energy seemed to diffuse Jordan's anger in ways that traditional discipline couldn't achieve. Sarah watched in amazement as the aggressive 12-year-old gradually began seeking Marcus's approval, straightening his posture when the janitor was nearby, taking extra care not to create unnecessary messes. "How do you do that?" Sarah asked after witnessing Jordan voluntarily help Marcus clean up a spilled milk incident. "I don't do anything," Marcus replied. "I just remember what it feels like to be 12 and angry at the world." The transformation was so subtle that most adults missed it entirely. But Sarah, now deliberately observing Marcus's methods, began to understand that she was witnessing something extraordinary. This wasn't just good classroom management, it was a form of teaching that operated on levels deeper than curriculum or discipline. Marcus was showing these privileged children something their expensive educations couldn't provide: the dignity of service, the power of patience, the strength that came from controlling one's own reactions rather than trying to control others. Then came the day that changed everything. Sarah was researching online articles about alternative education methods when she stumbled across a newspaper archive from 6 years earlier. The headline made her breath catch: "Local martial arts champion wins national tournament." The accompanying photograph showed a younger Marcus Williams, wearing a white gi and holding a gold medal, his face bright with accomplishment and possibility. The article described him as a rising star in American martial arts, with particular praise for his innovative teaching methods and his ability to connect with troubled youth. The man in the photograph looked like Marcus, but he also looked like someone who had never pushed a mop or cleaned a toilet in his life. Sarah spent the rest of the evening digging deeper into Marcus's past. She found more articles, more photographs, more evidence of a life that seemed completely disconnected from the quiet janitor she knew. Marcus Williams had been a nationally ranked martial artist, a sought-after instructor, a man whose future had seemed limitless. The last article she could find was dated just 2 years before he'd started working at St. Margaret's. It was an obituary. Keiko Williams, 34, beloved wife and mother, died Tuesday in a traffic accident on Highway 101. She is survived by her husband Marcus and daughter Emma. The photograph showed a beautiful Japanese woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, the same smile Sarah had seen in Emma's face. The pieces began fitting together with heartbreaking clarity. Marcus Williams hadn't chosen to be a janitor. He'd been broken by loss, reduced to the most basic form of survival. His martial arts career had died with his wife, along with whatever dreams and ambitions had once shaped his future. Sarah understood now why he moved through the world like a ghost, why he seemed to be hiding in plain sight. He wasn't just grieving, he was protecting himself from the possibility of caring too much, of being vulnerable to loss again. But understanding Marcus's past only deepened Sarah's questions about his present. If he'd been a professional martial artist, why had he accepted Principal Davidson's cruel challenge? Why had he offered to teach the children anything at all? And what had he meant when he'd said he would teach them, but not karate? The man she'd been observing seemed to be emerging from some kind of long hibernation, as if interacting with the children was slowly reawakening parts of himself he'd thought were gone forever. The answer came sooner than expected, in the form of an elderly Japanese man who appeared at the school one Tuesday morning. Sensei Yamamoto was 72 years old, dignified and precise, wearing a simple gray suit that somehow conveyed more authority than Principal Davidson's expensive Italian wardrobe. He asked for Marcus Williams by name, and when Sarah directed him to the gymnasium, she couldn't resist following at a distance. What she witnessed was a reunion that seemed to carry the weight of unfinished business. "Marcus-san," the elderly man said, his voice carrying a formal respect that seemed to transform Marcus where he stood. "You have been hiding long enough." Marcus set down his mop and bowed deeply, the same perfect bow Sarah had seen in the faculty lounge. "Sensei," he replied, his own voice taking on a formality that suggested ritual and tradition. "I am not the man I was." The old man smiled sadly. "You are exactly the man you have always been, but you have forgotten how to see yourself clearly." Their conversation was brief but intense, conducted in a mixture of English and Japanese that Sarah couldn't fully follow. But the emotional subtext was clear. Sensei Yamamoto was trying to call Marcus back to something he'd abandoned, and Marcus was resisting with the desperate energy of someone protecting a wound. "The children here need what you can teach them," the old man said. "And you need to remember that teaching is not about perfection, it is about connection." When Marcus shook his head, Sensei Yamamoto's expression grew stern. "Keiko-san would be disappointed in your fear," he said quietly. She died believing you would use your gifts to help others, not hide them in shame. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Sarah watched his face cycle through grief, anger, and something that might have been recognition. I failed her, he said finally. I wasn't there when she needed me most. How can I teach anyone about protection when I couldn't protect the person who mattered most? Sensei Yamamoto stepped closer, placing a weathered hand on Marcus's shoulder. You did not fail her, Marcus-san. You failed yourself by choosing to stop living when she could not. But it is not too late to honor her memory by becoming the teacher she always knew you could be. After Sensei Yamamoto left, Marcus disappeared for the rest of the day. Sarah found herself checking the gymnasium repeatedly, hoping to see him emerge from whatever internal struggle the old man's visit had triggered. When she finally encountered him the next morning, something fundamental had shifted. Marcus still wore his janitor's uniform, still pushed the same cleaning cart, but he moved with a different kind of purpose. The invisible man was becoming visible again, and Sarah sensed that the real story was about to begin. The transformation revealed itself gradually, like a photograph developing in slow motion. Marcus began incorporating subtle lessons into his daily routines, teaching the children principles of balance and breathing while ostensibly just cleaning around them. He showed Tommy Rodriguez how to stand with confidence by adjusting his own posture and letting the boy naturally mimic the change. He demonstrated patience to Jordan Blake by the methodical way he cleaned windows, each stroke deliberate and mindful. These weren't formal lessons, but they were teaching nonetheless the kind of education that happened through example rather than instruction. Sarah started staying after school more often, inventing reasons to be present when Marcus worked with the children. She watched him guide Emma through what appeared to be homework help but was actually a sophisticated lesson in focus and discipline. Mathematics is like meditation, Marcus would say, helping his daughter solve problems through breathing exercises and postural adjustments. The mind must be quiet to see clearly. Emma would nod solemnly, understanding concepts that most adults struggled to grasp. The changes in the children became impossible to ignore. Tommy Rodriguez's chronic slouching disappeared, replaced by a natural confidence that made him seem taller and more mature. Jordan Blake's explosive outbursts decreased significantly, as if Marcus's presence had taught him to recognize and control his own emotional triggers. Even the academic performance of several students improved, though their teachers couldn't explain why. Parents began asking questions about their children's new habits, the careful way they folded their clothes, their increased patience with frustrating tasks, their sudden interest in breathing exercises and meditation. Principal Davidson noticed the changes too, but his response was predictably cynical. I don't care if the janitor thinks he's some kind of child whisperer, he told Sarah during a faculty meeting. The man is paid to clean, not to play amateur psychologist with our students. But Sarah could see that Davidson was threatened by Marcus's influence, disturbed by the way the children responded to someone he considered inferior. The principal's prejudices were being challenged by results he couldn't dismiss or explain. The crisis came during the third week of March, when Jordan Blake's behavioral problems exploded into violence. The boy had been struggling with his parents' high-profile divorce, his father's political scandal, and the constant pressure of living up to impossible expectations. During lunch period, his frustration boiled over into a physical altercation with Tommy Rodriguez that sent the smaller boy tumbling down a concrete staircase. Tommy's wrist was broken, his face was bruised, and the incident was witnessed by dozens of students and teachers. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Parents demanded accountability, lawyers were consulted, and Jordan Blake faced immediate expulsion. Principal Davidson was furious, ranting about liability and reputation while completely ignoring the underlying causes of the violence. This is what happens when we let standards slip, he declared during an emergency faculty meeting, when we allow inappropriate influences to undermine proper discipline. His meaning was clear: Marcus Williams was somehow responsible for the chaos, and changes would need to be made. But Marcus's response surprised everyone. Instead of defending himself or making excuses, he took full responsibility for the incident. I should have seen the signs, he told the assembled faculty. Jordan was struggling, and I failed to provide the guidance he needed. This acceptance of blame, rather than deflecting it, seemed to diffuse some of the administrative anger. But it also revealed something important about Marcus's character. He understood that true leadership meant accepting responsibility for failures, not just claiming credit for successes. The disciplinary hearing was scheduled for the following Monday, giving everyone a tense weekend to consider their options. Jordan Blake would face expulsion, Tommy Rodriguez would recover from his injuries, and Marcus Williams would likely lose his job for overstepping his boundaries. The situation seemed to have no winners, only varying degrees of loss. But Sarah sensed that Marcus was planning something, that his quiet acceptance of responsibility was actually preparation for a larger revelation. Sunday evening, Sarah received an unexpected phone call from Marcus. "I need to show you something," he said, his voice carrying a weight she hadn't heard before. "If you're going to understand what happens tomorrow, you need to see who I really am." They met at a small martial arts studio across town, a modest space that seemed disconnected from the luxury and privilege of St. Margaret's Academy. Marcus was already there when she arrived, wearing not his janitor's uniform but a simple white gi that transformed him entirely. "My wife opened this studio 12 years ago," Marcus explained, his voice soft with memory. "She wanted to teach traditional martial arts to children who couldn't afford expensive lessons. We worked here together until—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Sarah understood. This place was a shrine to his former life, preserved exactly as it had been when Keiko was alive. Photographs on the walls showed Marcus and his wife teaching children, competing in tournaments, building a life around their shared passion for martial arts. "Keiko was the real teacher," Marcus continued, adjusting his gi with practiced movements. "I was just the muscle." She understood that martial arts wasn't about fighting, it was about building character, teaching discipline, helping people find their own strength. He moved to the center of the studio, closing his eyes and taking a deep breath. "I stopped coming here after she died. I thought I could never teach again without her. But watching those children at the academy, seeing their struggles, I realized that hiding from my abilities isn't honoring her memory, it's betraying it." What followed was the most beautiful and powerful demonstration Sarah had ever witnessed. Marcus moved through a series of martial arts forms with fluid grace, each movement precise and purposeful. But more than technical skill, his performance radiated something deeper, a connection to tradition, to discipline, to the kind of inner strength that couldn't be bought or inherited. This wasn't just physical exercise, it was meditation in motion, a form of prayer that used the body to express truths that words couldn't capture. "This is what I wanted to teach them," Marcus said when he finished. "Not how to fight, but how to be strong. Not how to defeat others, but how to defeat fear, anger, and despair within themselves." He looked directly at Sarah, his eyes bright with purpose. "Tomorrow, I'm going to tell them the truth about who I am. And I'm going to offer to teach their children what Keiko taught me, that real strength comes from gentleness, that true power serves others, and that the greatest victory is conquering your own weaknesses." The disciplinary hearing began at 8 o'clock Monday morning in the Academy's main conference room. Principal Davidson presided over the proceedings like a judge, flanked by members of the school board and several prominent parents. Jordan Blake sat between his lawyer and his mother, looking smaller and more vulnerable than Sarah had ever seen him. Tommy Rodriguez was absent, still recovering from his injuries, but his parents were present and visibly angry. The atmosphere was tense, formal, and completely focused on punishment rather than understanding. Marcus entered the room wearing his janitor's uniform, but something about his bearing had changed completely. He moved with the same quiet confidence Sarah had witnessed in the studio, his posture straight and dignified. When Principal Davidson asked him to explain his role in the incident, Marcus stood and spoke with clarity and conviction. "I have been teaching the children of this school," he said. "Not officially, not with permission, but teaching nonetheless. And I failed to provide Jordan Blake with the guidance he needed to control his anger." The room erupted in confused murmurs. Parents demanded to know what Marcus meant by teaching, while Principal Davidson's face reddened with indignation. "You were hired to clean this school, not to interfere with our educational programs," he shouted. "You have overstepped your authority in the most irresponsible way possible." But Marcus remained calm, his voice steady as he continued. "I have been teaching them through example, through patience, through the same principles my wife used when she ran a martial arts studio for underprivileged children." The revelation of Marcus's background sent shockwaves through the room. Parents who had dismissed him as just the janitor suddenly realized they were dealing with someone far more complex than they'd imagined. Sarah watched as the power dynamics shifted, as Marcus's quiet dignity began to challenge the assumptions everyone had made about class, worth, and the nature of true education. "I was a nationally ranked martial artist," Marcus continued. "I taught children for 15 years before my wife died and I lost my way. I came here to hide from my responsibilities, but these children deserve better than a broken man who refuses to use his gifts." Principal Davidson tried to regain control of the situation, but Marcus's honesty had changed the entire dynamic. "Regardless of your background," the principal sputtered, "you had no right to." But he was interrupted by Jordan Blake's mother, who had been listening intently to Marcus's words. "Wait," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Are you saying you could have helped my son control his anger? That you had the ability to teach him discipline and chose not to share it?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus looked directly at Jordan's mother, his expression compassionate but unwavering. "I could have done more," he said simply. "I should have done more. I let my own grief and fear prevent me from offering your son the guidance he needed. That is my failure, and I accept full responsibility for it." The honesty was devastating and powerful simultaneously. Here was a man who could have made excuses, who could have blamed others, but instead took accountability for his shortcomings. Jordan Blake suddenly stood up, his young voice shaking with emotion. "He did help me," the boy said, surprising everyone in the room. "Mr. Williams taught me how to breathe when I got angry. He showed me how to stand up straight when I felt small. He never yelled at me, never made me feel stupid, never treated me like I was broken." Tears were streaming down the 12-year-old's face. "I pushed Tommy because I was angry at my dad, not because Mr. Williams didn't help me. He's the only adult in this whole school who actually cares about us as people instead of just test scores and donations." The boy's testimony created a profound silence in the room. Sarah watched as parents looked at their children with new understanding, recognizing that their expensive education might be missing something essential. Marcus had been operating beneath their notice, providing the kind of guidance and mentorship that money couldn't buy. The realization was uncomfortable for adults who prided themselves on giving their children every advantage. Tommy Rodriguez's father, who had been demanding harsh punishment just moments before, suddenly stood up. "My son has been different these past few weeks," he said slowly. "More confident, more respectful, more centered. I couldn't understand where these changes were coming from." He looked at Marcus with something approaching respect. "You've been teaching our children character, haven't you? The kind of lessons we assumed they were getting from their expensive classes and private tutors." The admission opened floodgates. Parent after parent began sharing observations about their children's recent changes: improved posture, increased patience, better emotional regulation. The evidence was overwhelming. Marcus Williams had been providing something their privileged educations couldn't offer. Principal Davidson's face grew increasingly red as he realized the implications. If Marcus had been successfully teaching these children valuable life skills, what did that say about the Academy's official programs? Sarah seized the moment to speak. "I've been observing Mr. Williams for months," she said, her voice steady and professional. "What I've witnessed is the most effective teaching I've ever seen. He doesn't use textbooks or lesson plans. He teaches through example, through patience, through genuine care for each child's individual needs. These students have been receiving an education in character and self-discipline that no curriculum could provide." The room was quiet now, the anger and defensiveness replaced by something more complex. Marcus Williams, the invisible janitor, had become the center of a conversation about education, privilege, and the true meaning of teaching. Principal Davidson made one last attempt to regain control. "This is highly irregular," he said. "We cannot allow unauthorized personnel to influence our students, regardless of their background or intentions." But his words sounded hollow now, defensive rather than authoritative. It was Jordan Blake who provided the final devastating response. "You want to expel me for fighting," the boy said, his voice clearer now. "But you want to fire the only person who was actually trying to help me not fight." The simple logic was undeniable. The adults in the room had been so focused on punishment that they'd missed the opportunity for actual education. Marcus Williams had been providing exactly what these children needed, and the official response was to eliminate him. The hearing ended without resolution, but the impact was permanent. Word of Marcus's background spread through the academy like wildfire, forcing everyone to reconsider their assumptions about worth, education, and the nature of true teaching. Parents who had never spoken to the janitor began approaching him with questions about their children. Students who had taken his quiet presence for granted suddenly understood that they'd been learning from someone extraordinary. The school board met in emergency session that afternoon. Sarah wasn't present, but she heard the details later from sympathetic colleagues. The discussion was heated, with board members split between those who saw Marcus as a liability and those who recognized him as an asset. The legal concerns were significant, An unauthorized employee had been providing instruction to students without proper credentials or oversight. But the educational results were undeniable, and several board members had children who had benefited from Marcus's influence. The compromise, when it came, was unprecedented. Marcus Williams would be offered a position as a special consultant, tasked with developing a character education program for the academy. He would no longer be a janitor, but he wouldn't be a traditional teacher either. His role would be to provide the kind of guidance and mentorship that had been missing from their expensive education model. The salary was modest, but it represented recognition of his true value and abilities. Marcus's response surprised everyone. He declined the position. "I appreciate the offer," he told the board, "but I've realized that true teaching can't be confined to institutions or limited to those who can afford it. My wife always believed that the most important lessons should be available to everyone, regardless of their economic circumstances." Instead of joining the academy's faculty, Marcus announced his intention to reopen Keiko's studio, to continue the work she had started with underprivileged children. The decision created a crisis for St. Margaret's Academy. Several prominent families announced their intention to enroll their children in Marcus's program, even if it meant supplementing their private school education with lessons at a modest community studio. The irony was inescapable. Parents who paid $50,000 per year for their children's education were now seeking out a widowed janitor who offered something their expensive institution couldn't provide. Sarah made her own decision that week. She submitted her resignation to St. Margaret's Academy and asked Marcus if he needed an assistant at the studio. "I've learned more about teaching by watching you than I did in 4 years of education courses," she told him. "I want to be part of something that actually makes a difference in children's lives." Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile Sarah had seen from him in months. "Keiko would like that," he said. She always believed that teaching was too important to be left to schools alone. The new studio opened 3 months later in a converted warehouse across town. The space was simple but beautiful, with polished wooden floors and walls lined with photographs of Keiko and Marcus teaching children from their previous life. The program was unusual, part martial arts instruction, part character education, part life skills training. Students learned physical techniques, but they also learned meditation, conflict resolution, and the kind of emotional intelligence that traditional schools rarely addressed. The first class included Jordan Blake and Tommy Rodriguez, 2 boys whose conflict had sparked the entire transformation. They arrived separately, each accompanied by nervous parents, but Marcus immediately put them to work together. "Strength is not about defeating others," he told them as they practiced basic forms. "It is about helping others find their own strength." By the end of the session, the boys were working as partners, their previous antagonism replaced by mutual respect. Emma Williams was her father's assistant instructor, demonstrating techniques with the same quiet confidence Marcus had shown in the academy gymnasium. At 9 years old, she had absorbed lessons that many adults struggled to understand. "My daddy says that real power is helping people," she explained to new students. "My mommy taught him that, and now he teaches it to everyone." The simple wisdom of a child provided the foundation for everything the studio represented. Sarah found herself learning alongside the children, discovering that Marcus's teaching methods worked as effectively with adults as with kids. The emphasis on patience, discipline, and self-awareness created an environment where everyone, regardless of age or background, could grow and develop. Traditional education focuses on filling minds with information, Marcus explained during one of their planning sessions. But character education focuses on strengthening souls. Information changes constantly, but character lasts forever. The studio's reputation grew through word of mouth rather than advertising. Parents who had been skeptical of Marcus's unconventional background began bringing their children after witnessing the changes in their classmates. The waiting list grew longer each month, but Marcus was careful to maintain the intimate, personal atmosphere that made his teaching so effective. "Keiko used to say that teaching is like gardening," he told Sarah. "You can't rush growth, and you can't force blooms. You can only provide the right conditions and trust the process." 6 months after opening, the studio had become something unprecedented, a place where children from vastly different backgrounds learned together, where character mattered more than credentials, where the invisible man had become the most visible teacher in the community. Marcus Williams had found his way back to his true calling, not by forgetting his grief, but by transforming it into purpose. The final lesson came on a quiet Tuesday evening, when the last students had gone home and Marcus was preparing to close the studio. Sarah was organizing equipment while Emma practiced forms in the corner, her movements fluid and precise despite her young age. The photograph of Keiko watched over them from its place of honor on the wall, her gentle smile blessing the work that continued in her memory. "Do you think she would be proud?" Sarah asked, following Marcus's gaze to the photograph. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his expression peaceful in a way that had taken months to achieve. "She is proud," he said finally. "Every child who learns to stand a little straighter, every parent who sees their son or daughter with new eyes, every person who discovers that true strength comes from gentleness, she is present in all of it." He adjusted Emma's posture with a gentle touch, the same patient guidance he'd shown to countless students. "We are not just teaching martial arts," he continued. "We are teaching the art of being human." The story of Marcus Williams, the janitor who shocked a school by revealing his true identity, had become something larger than any individual transformation. It was a reminder that worth isn't determined by job titles or bank accounts, that teaching happens in unexpected places, and that the most important lessons often come from the most unlikely sources. In a world obsessed with credentials and achievements, Marcus had proven that character and compassion were the only qualifications that truly mattered. As they locked up the studio that evening, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this point. A cruel joke in a faculty lounge had revealed a hidden master. A moment of mockery had become a catalyst for profound change. The invisible man had found his voice, and in doing so, had taught everyone around him to see more clearly, not just the world, but themselves. The last light faded from the studio windows, but the glow of purpose remained. Tomorrow would bring new students, new challenges, and new opportunities to prove that the most powerful teaching happens, not in classrooms, but in hearts. Marcus Williams had learned to bow again not in submission, but in recognition of the sacred responsibility that comes with guiding others toward their own strength. And in that bow, Keiko's wisdom lived on, flowing from teacher to student like water finding its natural course.